Violent incident reporting for KPRETFO members. One of the most frequent questions that we receive from members is, how do I report a violent incident? Not all members know how to access the forms or when it's appropriate to use them, and that's what we'd like to clarify now. It might seem like a strange question, but sometimes it isn't clear what violence actually is. Legislation broadly defines workplace violence as the exercise of physical force by a person against a worker in a workplace that causes or could cause physical injury to the worker, an attempt to exercise physical force, or a statement or behavior that is reasonable for a worker to interpret as a threat to exercise physical force. Any time that we're subject to violence or the threat of violence in our schools, we have a duty to report it. We have duties under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to report workplace violence and under the Education Act for reporting serious student incidents. And this is why we have two different forms. Remember, if there's no report of the incident, there will be no data and therefore no problem requiring investigation and remedy. If anyone suggests that you shouldn't report on a violent incident, please inform your local ETFO office for clarification. Our principal may take into account mitigating circumstances, but that's not our decision to make. Our duty is to report the incident. So this applies to incidents that involve all students, regardless of age or ability, staff members, and community members. So we're all incredibly busy, and it seems like there's no end of paperwork that piles up sometimes. Our first priority is to get immediate assistance and to report this incident to our principal. You can do so verbally or in writing. And if you can't fill out a form right away, that's okay. When you can, at the end of the day, when you have a few minutes to catch your breath, use this time to submit a report. The reports are quick and easy to complete. All violent incidents will involve you. Depending on the nature of the incident and the perpetrator, you may be completing either a workplace violence report or a Safe Schools Incident Report form, also known as a Student Incident Report. Some instances may require both forms. So let's look at the difference between these forms now. The Safe Schools Incident Reporting Form, or Student Incident Report, is to be used when reporting a serious incident perpetrated by a student for which suspension or expulsion must be considered by the principal as described under the Education Act. The Workplace Violence Report is to report workplace violence as defined under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The perpetrator of the workplace violence would be a person in the workplace, adult or child, worker or student, and the victim of the workplace violence or the threat of workplace violence is the worker. Again, sometimes both forms are required. So let's look at the workplace violence incident form first. When is this form required? When you are the victim of a violent incident in your workplace. And who does it go to? It automatically goes to your principal, your local federation office, and the board office. Both the Student Incident Report and the Workplace Violence Report can easily be found on KPR on the web. Click on the link on the right of the page labeled Quick Forms. If you have any trouble accessing it, go to our local federation website, kpretfo.ca, where you can download a copy of both forms. Please ensure that you email the completed form to admin@kpretfo.ca and healthandsafety@kprdsb.ca. Before we look at these forms in detail, please keep the following in mind. These forms are works in progress. Legislation into many of these matters is ongoing, and we expect that forms will evolve over time. They both have strengths and weaknesses and represent a snapshot of our board's current practices. This is the KPR's Workplace Violence Report form. When you access it on your school computer, it will open using a program called LiveCycle. This will automatically generate some of the information for you based on your login account. And when you submit the report, it automatically goes to the correct recipients. So scrolling down the first page, you can see that there are quick checkboxes to determine where and when the incident took place, the name of the targeted person, if different from the person filling out the form, a descriptor of the targeted person, and a descriptor of the perpetrator. This next section gives you the opportunity to list witnesses to this event and to describe in your own words what happened. This is an open text box and you can give as much detail as you think is necessary. You may use names or initials to identify the perpetrator. Section B focuses on specific actions that may have occurred during the violent incident. These are all checkboxes and quick to fill out. If you click on any of these 7 types of violent incidences and the perpetrator was a student, you must fill out the student incident report as well. More on that in a few minutes. The next section asks a series of questions about reporting this incident and are fairly straightforward. Please note, if you were injured in this incident, you must report the injury to the board office. Section C is specific to incidents where the student was a perpetrator. This section asks about history of similar incidents, what kind of protective measures may have been in place, and whether or not there was a safety plan in place. It will go directly to your principal, the school board's health and safety officer, and your union, and please save a copy for your own files. If the violent incident was caused by a student, you also need to complete a student incident report. So let's look at that form now. So this form was created by the Ministry of Education. It's between you as the teacher and your administrator, and unlike the workplace violence incident report, your union will not receive a copy. So it's a 2-page report. Teachers must fill out the first page. Principals need to investigate the incident and then fill out the second page and report back to the teacher who initially submitted the report showing how the situation will be remedied or avoided going forward. Your principal must investigate the incident and report back to you in writing within a reasonable amount of time, say 48 hours. These reports go to the superintendent responsible for safe schools and must be reported back to the Ministry of Education annually. If action is taken, the form must be kept in the student's OSR for 1 year. This form is to be used to respond to actions for which suspension or expulsion must be considered by the board. These are listed on the form itself. There may be mitigating factors that prevent a principal from suspending or expelling a student. However, that's not our decision to make as teachers. Our responsibility is to complete the report as required. It's our responsibility to report the incident, and it's the principal's responsibility to investigate and determine if there are any consequences. If you are ever encouraged or directed not to report a violent incident, contact your local FO office, please. So the report is very straightforward and quick to fill out. The first section gathers information about the incident, where, when, the name of the student or the students involved. And the next section is a checklist of those activities for which suspension must be considered under the Education Act: uttering a threat, possessing alcohol or illegal drugs, being under the influence of alcohol, swearing at a teacher or at a person in a position of authority, committing an act of vandalism that causes extensive damage at or located on the premises of the student's school, bullying, or any other activity for which a student may be suspended under board policy. The following section is a checklist of activities for which expulsion must be considered under the Education Act: possessing a weapon, including possessing a firearm, using a weapon to cause or threaten bodily harm to another person, committing physical assault on another person that causes bodily harm requiring treatment by a medical practitioner, committing sexual assault, trafficking in weapons or illegal drugs, committing robbery, any activity from the previous list that's motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate, and giving alcohol to a minor. So, is the employer obligated to share information about violent individuals with other staff members? An employer or supervisor must provide information about risks of harm from a person with a history of violent behavior if the employee may encounter this person in the course of his or her duties, and if this person is likely to inflict harm. How much information should be given? According to the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as much as is reasonably necessary. So this has been a brief overview of our duty to report violent incidents. We expect this process to evolve over time. If you have any further questions, please call your local ETFO office or email your released officers.